In the heart of a golden desert, under a sky that seemed to whisper secrets of centuries past, two souls met in a moment that felt fated. Keys, the son of a respected elder, and Layla, a girl of unmatched grace, crossed paths in the modest school of their village. What began as shared ink-stained fingers and stolen glances quickly grew into something far deeper, an invisible thread tying their hearts with a force neither could name but both felt in every heartbeat. Keys noticed her first, not for her beauty, though it was undeniable, but for the way silence sat peacefully around her. Her presence calmed the storm inside him, and in her eyes, he found a home he'd never known he was missing. Layla, in turn, felt her world change each time Keys spoke. His words weren't just sounds, they were music. Even as children, their bond defied explanation. They didn't need promises. The truth of what they felt passed between them in quiet looks and the way they lingered just a moment too long beside each other. Their families began to notice. Love between children was a harmless thing, but what was growing between Keys and Layla had the weight of destiny. Rumors spread like fire in dry wind. Whispers turned to stern warnings. Elders began to watch more closely. A father's pride and a tribe's reputation were not things to be gambled on youthful love. But Keys could no longer pretend. He began to write, to pour his heart into verses, poetry soaked in emotion and aching with truth. The village gave him a name, Majnun, the Mad One. Still, his madness was love in its purest form. He wrote about Layla like a man who had seen heaven and been cast out. In every word, her name was a prayer. But no prayer could change what followed. Layla's father, fearing disgrace, forbade her from speaking to Keys again. He was a poet, not a prince. What family would accept a suitor who wandered in verses instead of carrying swords? The separation carved a wound deeper than time. Layla obeyed her family, but her silence was not agreement. It was the sacrifice of a heart too loyal to betray her people. Keys, devastated, continued writing. Each poem was a rebellion. Each verse, a confession. He wandered the village like a ghost chasing echoes of laughter now lost to memory. They were torn apart not by their own will but by the hands of those who feared what love could make of two young hearts. Even apart, they remained tied, two halves of a sentence that refused to end. What had started as a quiet affection was now a storm waiting to break. And in that storm, Keys stood alone, whispering her name into the wind, refusing to forget the only truth he had ever known, that he was hers, entirely, even in madness. Layla's silence became a prison. Behind her composed eyes lived a storm that never settled. Her heart still beat for Keys, but her lips had been sealed by duty. Her father, unmoved by her tears, arranged her marriage to a man of wealth and influence, someone whose name brought status, not scandal. The decision was final. Layla was married off without ceremony in her heart, a bride only in appearance. Her soul remained untouched. Keys heard the news like a blade against his chest. He did not weep, he wandered. He did not fight, he faded. With each step into the desert, he left behind the world that had denied him the one thing that made life bearable. His poetry grew darker, lonelier. He stopped speaking to people. His only conversations were with the wind, with the stars, with memories that refused to leave. They called him Majnun not for madness, but for loving beyond reason, beyond limits. Layla's new life was nothing more than an act. Her husband, though noble and well-regarded, was a stranger. She lay beside him but dreamt only of Keys. She fulfilled her duties, but inside, she withered. She wrote letters she never sent, whispered apologies to the night sky, and reread the poems Keys had once left for her. She did not touch another man in love, but she had already betrayed the marriage in the one way that mattered. Her heart had never been available. Her husband noticed. He was not cruel, but he was not blind. He saw the way she drifted, how her eyes searched for something absent. He discovered a note once, folded carefully beneath a cushion, words that didn't belong to him. The poem was about love unfulfilled, a devotion too raw to be fiction. He recognized the name in the final line. Keys. Majnun. The ghost of their marriage. Though Layla had done nothing physical, the betrayal was complete in his eyes. He confronted her, not with rage, but with quiet devastation. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. What could she say? That her heart had been stolen before she ever stood at that altar. That her vows had meant nothing compared to the promise she had once made with a glance in Keys's direction. Her husband began to withdraw. What was left between them wasn't a marriage, it was a performance, lifeless and cold. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak much. And she didn't complain. She had already lost everything. She wore gold on her hands but carried grief in her eyes. Majnun, miles away, felt it. Though they hadn't spoken in years, he knew. Her pain was his. Her silence echoed louder than any words. He wrote more furiously than ever, his verses no longer asking for love, they mourned it. He was no longer seeking to win her back. He was mourning her as if she had died, because in every way that mattered to him, she had. Majnun abandoned the world that no longer made sense. He let go of his name, his family, even his own reflection. Nothing mattered beyond the ache that lived inside him. Love had once given him purpose, now, it gave him madness. He wandered through desolate lands, muttering verses no one could understand, composing poems for a woman he could never hold again. He slept beneath open skies and spoke to the moon like an old friend. Hunger didn't touch him. Pain didn't shake him. All he felt was her absence. People began to talk of him as a myth. Some pitied him, others feared him. Children were told stories about the man who lost his mind for love. But to Majnun, he hadn't lost anything, he had simply traded the ordinary for something higher. He was no longer a man seeking affection. He was a soul consumed by a love so vast it broke the rules of sanity. Every line he wrote was a prayer, every breath, a vow. Layla lived behind veils, surrounded by luxury, untouched by comfort. Her body lived in one world, but her thoughts remained with him. She heard stories of Majnun in whispers, how he spoke to animals, how his poetry was still recited across villages, how he refused to say any name except hers. Each tale stabbed her with guilt and longing. She envied his madness. At least he was honest about what love had done to him. She, on the other hand, wore the mask of a dutiful wife while dying quietly inside. She tried to send a message, just once. A single letter, folded and hidden inside a flower, passed through the hands of a trusted servant. In it, she wrote not of regret, but of truth. That her love had never ended. That her marriage had been a decision forced, not chosen. That if souls could touch across distance, hers was holding his every day. Majnun received it like a sign from beyond the stars. He pressed the letter to his chest and read it until the ink blurred. But it didn't bring peace. It reminded him that she was still locked away in a life where he could never reach her. Their love hadn't died, but the world had buried it alive. He wrote no reply. There was nothing left to say. Instead, he climbed to the highest hill near the desert's edge and shouted her name into the sky until his voice broke. Then, silence. He sat there for hours, unmoving, watching the sky change colors, as if waiting for it to answer him back. There was no anger in him, only surrender. He didn't curse fate or blame her. Love wasn't supposed to make sense. It was supposed to burn. And in that fire, he let himself disappear, no longer a man, but a whisper carried by the wind. Layla's strength faded with time. The weight of silence, the pressure of duty, and the ache of unfinished love wore her down. Her body remained in her husband's home, but her soul lived elsewhere, aching for a presence she could no longer reach. She rarely spoke. Her smiles had vanished. Those around her assumed illness, but the real disease was longing. Each passing day became heavier, her breaths thinner. When death came, it was not sudden, it was a quiet surrender. She whispered Keys's name one last time, then let go. The news traveled slowly, carried from one mouth to another, eventually reaching Majnun through a traveler who had once heard him speak in verse. The words did not shock him. He had felt it the night it happened. Something in him had gone still, like a candle extinguished by a wind he couldn't see. He said nothing. Just stood up, turned, and began walking toward her final resting place. He reached the grave after days of travel, thinner than ever, more spirit than flesh. There was no one to greet him, no ceremony. He sat beside the mound of earth, touched the stone that bore her name, and bowed his head. There were no tears left in him, no final poems. only stillness. He remained there through the day, through the night, unmoving. By morning, he was gone. They found him lying beside her, his hand near hers. There were no signs of suffering, only peace. It was as if he had simply decided his time had come now that her absence had become permanent. Villagers buried him beside her, placing no grand markers. Just 2 names carved gently into stone. But something strange began to grow where they lay. Wild roses, red and full, sprang from the ground, and the vines twisted together, as if nature itself refused to let them remain apart. Their story spread further than any poem ever could. It wasn't just about love, it was about the betrayal of a world that could not accept its purity. Layla and Majnun never hurt each other, never turned away. They were betrayed by time, by expectation, by the illusion that love must always be practical or approved. In truth, theirs was the kind of love that rarely survives in life but always lives in legend. People still speak their names, not as cautionary tales, but as symbols of something unbreakable. They were lovers who never kissed, souls who never shared a life, yet together they became eternal. Their bond outlasted judgment, outlived shame. Even death couldn't divide them in the end. What the world tried to bury, love resurrected. And in that silence beside the grave, where no more words were needed, Majnun and Layla were finally free, not in flesh, but in something far greater. Not even madness could touch them now. Only memory. Only myth. Only love, untouched by time.